Having listened to an amazing range of views, insights, perspectives over the last day and a half, I must admit that I'm torn as to what to focus my remarks on. Should I give you a big picture? As the World Bank treasurer, worrying about how my team and I can earn reasonable returns on the $170 billion of assets that we manage in such a difficult market environment. Or as a staff of the World Bank, a global development institution that was founded in 1944 and that has accompanied many countries and the global economy in the twists and turns that we've seen over the years. Or as an eternal optimist in the midst of the many challenges that the world faces. Or as a citizen of the world, worrying about the legacy that we will bequeath our children and our grandchildren. I will attempt to do all the above. And I've thought through the conversations and the discussions that I've had over the last 1.5 days, what would be the theme that would bring together everything that I'm going to say in the next few minutes? I thought that theme, that I would call it harnessing the power of a borderless world to do good and do well. I consider myself very fortunate to be in a Zeitgeist conference, given that I could easily have been Nenna, another 52-year-old woman from my hometown, Item, in Nigeria, who still walks 2 kilometers a day to fetch water so she can help her children take care of her grandchildren. Every year, women around the world still spend 73 billion hours per day fetching water. Addressing this issue and the myriads that prevent women from achieving their potential, in other words, closing the gender gap, can increase the world GDP by up to $28 trillion by 2025, according to McKinsey. I believe a borderless world could even make this happen faster. So how do I define a borderless world? A borderless world is one where there are equal opportunities, no matter your gender, your race, your origin, where you live, and who your parents are. It is a world that recognizes that wars, famine, disease, and climate risk in one location affects us all, and that insecurity in one place is insecurity everywhere. It is a world where there are no physical or mental walls, and note I said physical or mental walls, and where your neighbors are the 7.5 billion people that live on planet Earth. It is a world where your community comprises the 3.5 billion people that have access to internet, and your customers are the 5 billion people that subscribe to mobile phones across the world. This borderless mindset, in my view, allows companies and individuals to do well and do good. In other words, you can earn a reasonable return on whatever you do and leave a compelling legacy. It is such a mindset that has enabled the many disruptions that many of you have championed. It is why 25% of Kenya's GDP now passes through M-Pesa, Kenya's widely acclaimed mobile money initiative. It is why the first national ID system created for more than 1 billion Indian citizens is heartwarming for me, because this new world of commerce and capital literally puts some of the world's poorest people on the map for all of us. Just as technology fosters a borderless world, so too does finance. I did not learn this important fact 32 years ago when I started my career at an investment banking boutique in Nigeria, but much earlier, as a child at dinner with my parents and my two sisters. And it struck me through the last 1.5 days that people kept referring to those early foundations, to their parents. In my case, my father made my sisters and I take turns to read out aloud annual reports of companies listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange that he had invested in. And we hated it. But if you know a Nigerian father, or if you knew my father, you had no choice but to read out aloud the annual reports. Both he, though, and my mom earned very little as civil servants in Nigeria, but they were able to pay for my education from dividends and from their investments. And I believe that's one of the reasons that I'm able to be amongst you. Much of my career also has subsequently been focused on finance and the capital markets. Little did I know that my father was preparing me for a career in finance. He didn't know because he wanted me actually to be an engineer because he was an engineer. But much of my career has also had me observe how finance, and particularly capital markets, are forces for good. Most notably, as a regulator of the Nigerian capital markets, I saw firsthand the potential of my country and the transformative power of capital markets, particularly as enablers of socio-economic development. The Nigerian capital markets enabled Nigeria to fund its huge infrastructure needs. It facilitated the reform of the pension sector from unfunded liabilities of $12 billion to assets that are growing every year by 30%. Most importantly, it's fostered a meritocracy, good governance, innovation, entrepreneurship, and it's created jobs. As a pioneer board member of the International Financing Facility for Immunization, an initiative that I must give credit to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown for founding, that was sponsored by the UK, France, and a number of other countries. I was privileged to contribute to IFIM's effort to leverage the capital markets to ensure that vaccines are available to the 70 poorest countries in the world. This initiative also enabled pharmaceutical companies to make the investment required for the profitable production of the required vaccines, doing good and doing well. As a World Bank staff, I see the power of finance every day, and especially as we raise low-cost funds from the international capital markets and develop innovative financial instruments to finance agriculture, education, health, technology, infrastructure projects in the public and private sector, fostering inclusive growth. We've been at the forefront of developing new financial instruments. Many of you may not know that we did the first formal contract with IBM for a currency swap in 1981. We launched the first global bond in 1989, and we launched the first plain vanilla green bond in 2008. Over the years, we've provided opportunities for the private sector to partner with us. We've used our global expertise to ensure the right sector reforms, a conducive operating environment, and garnered much needed support from the governments in the many countries where we operate. From working with Alibaba to create new markets for digital financial services, helping a small unknown provincial bank in China become one of the global financial service powerhouses called the Industrial Bank of China. Ensuring that the Jordanian airport is a profitable private sector venture that earns the government well-needed revenues. enabling Indian communities and families who lost their homes in a tsunami to rebuild them, open bank accounts, and set up small businesses using their homes as collateral. To assisting Zambia scale up recently its solar energy program by reducing the cost per kilowatt hour to 6 to 8 cents, and one of the lowest in the world. We've also recently started with working with philanthropic organizations to scale up their interventions, sometimes 5 times, sometimes leveraging them 10 times. We believe that we can encourage private sector to take full advantage of all these profitable opportunities so that we can focus more on what we consider our bread and butter, which is being where others are not, de-risking the fragile countries, and tackling the most daunting challenges of our time, which in our view are climate risk, pandemics, and forced displacements. For example, even though we're not a humanitarian agency, the global community recently asked us to bring our experience of innovative finance to help with the refugee crisis. Through our global concessional financing facility, we've been able to assist Jordan and Lebanon with funding their public services and infrastructure, and therefore start to tackle the refugee crisis, which, as many of you know, is the worst since World War II. We've also set up a pandemic emergency facility, essentially creating a pandemic risk market. The standby facility, which will be funded from a catastrophic bond and the reinsurance market, will ensure that the delays that the world experienced when Ebola struck in 2014 never happens again. I lived in Nigeria at the time, and I was shocked at how many more lives were lost and the rollback in development gains for Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, just because the world didn't organize itself to move as quickly as it should have done. That should never happen again. And we hope that the pandemic emergency facility that we'll set up will make sure that it doesn't happen again. Our mission is a world free of poverty, and my colleagues and I will not stop until the world is free of poverty. Our twin goals are to end extreme poverty and to boost shared prosperity. Johan gave a lot of a historical perspective on some of the gains that we've seen. I am just as optimistic as Johan, because if you look back to since 1990, more than 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty. And with the great minds in this room, I have no doubt that we will get to that world that is a world free of poverty. A major lesson, though, that we've learned as a public sector entity is that it is impossible for us to tackle these challenges alone, and that the private sector has to come on board. We've therefore revised our approach to focus more on being your partner. And so it was heartwarming listening to several speakers talk about partnership. We want to be your guarantor. We want to leverage our 70-year track record, the fact that we're owned by 189 member countries, to de-risk your investments in countries, in projects. And so please be our partner as we unfold our new approach in facilitating a borderless world. I do think we've had some notable successes. So let me pause and tell you about one such country. It had been devastated, and I'd like you to listen carefully, because I will ask you what that country is at the end. It's been devastated by a long war. It had been occupied by one of its neighbors. Many young people had died. After the war, half of the country's rail infrastructure was out of service. There were endless strikes. Food was scarce. Ministers were accused of corruption, of giving ration tickets to their friends. On top of all this, there was hyperinflation and a flourishing black market. Infant mortality had risen 40% in just 3 years. Can anyone guess what country I'm referring to? Sorry? Okay. Thank you. He said it first. It was France. I think I need to applaud you because when I often ask this question, people never know that it is France. And the reason they don't know it's France is because many people didn't know that our first loan was actually, to the day, 70 years ago, to France.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Similarly, 56 years ago on the 1st of May, the World Bank approved a loan to Japan for the widely known bullet train. And from 1963 to 1975, we approved several loans to Singapore and together laid the foundation for Singapore's success. And many of you know it's one of the wealthiest countries in the world by GDP per capita. So while France, Japan, and Singapore have been replaced by new low and middle-income countries, I am optimistic that many of these countries will become the France, the Japan, the Singapore of the future. So amid the gloom and doom, I am optimistic about the possibilities and the opportunities that the world has to offer. I'm even more opportunistic because of the last 1.5 days that I've spent with you all. Because with your great minds, there is nothing that we cannot deal with. In my view, there's never been a better time, a more important time for the private sector to join us in the role of global development. Your capital, combined with your expertise, our own experience, can help end extreme poverty while boosting shared prosperity in our lifetime. Many of you know the legacy that Mandela left. So I'd like to start to conclude with a quote from him, which is, "A fundamental concern for others is in our individual and community lives. And this would go a long way in making the world a better place, the better place that we so passionately dream of." So whether you're a tech genius, a scientist, a historian, a sportsman or woman, an activist, a CEO, Ruth, a CFO, other business executives, celebrities, innovators, academics, entrepreneurs, managers, and champions of positive change, which is what I call everyone in this room, let us work together as like-minded people to make a borderless world a reality, to end extreme poverty, and to ensure that we're indeed a good neighbor to the 7.5 billion people that live in this world. Thank you.